welcome everybody. It's my great pleasure to introduce you to our talk about Jane Austen. 250 years ago in a Hampshire rectory, a small baby girl, the seventh of 8 children, was born to a clergyman and his wife who would change the course of English literature. Now, to start off, to illustrate why we've had 250 years of Austenmania, the wonderful Lucy Boynton, who has starred in films including Bohemian Rhapsody and Murder on the Orient Express and TV shows like The Politician, is going to read us a passage from Sense and Sensibility. But aged 13, she played the youngest Dashwood sister in the BBC Sense and Sensibility, which was written by the one and only Andrew Davies.
ITV.
Oh, sorry. Okay, anyway. At this point in the story, the near-destitute Dashwood sisters, sensible Elliot, Eleanor, and flighty Marianne, are staying in London with their cousin, Mrs. Jennings. They have just gone to a ball where Marianne has been all but ignored by her former beau, Mr. Willoughby, and she is heartbroken. This chapter begins the next morning.
Should I do it from here?
I'll stand.
No, let's
stand.
see.
Oh, there we are. Before the housemaid had lit their fire the next day, or the sun gained any power over a cold, gloomy morning in January, Marianne, only half-dressed, was kneeling against the window seat for sake of all the little light she could command from it, and writing as fast as a continual flow of tears would permit her. In this situation, Eleanor, roused from sleep by her agitation and sobs, first perceived her, and, after observing her for a few moments with silent anxiety, said in a tone of the most considerate gentleness, "Marianne, may I ask?" "No, Eleanor," she replied. "Ask nothing. You will soon know all." The sort of desperate calmness with which this was said lasted no longer than while she spoke, and was immediately followed by a return of the same excessive affliction. It was some minutes before she could go on with her letter, and the frequent bursts of grief which still obliged her at intervals to withhold her pen were proofs enough of her feeling how more than probable it was that she was writing for the last time to Willoughby. Eleanor paid her every quiet and unobtrusive attention in her power, and she would have tried to soothe and tranquilize her still more had not Marianne entreated her, with all the eagerness of the most nervous irritability, not to speak to her for the world. In such circumstances, it was better for both that they should not be long together, and the restless state of Marianne's mind not only prevented her from remaining in the room a moment after she was dressed, but requiring at once solitude and continual change of place, made her wander about the house till breakfast time, avoiding the sight of everybody. At breakfast, she neither ate nor attempted to eat anything, and Eleanor's attention was then all employed not in urging her, not in pitying her, nor in appearing to regard her, but in endeavouring to engage Mrs. Jennings' notice entirely to herself. As this was a favourite meal of Mrs. Jennings, it lasted a considerable time, and they were just setting themselves after it round the common working table when a letter was delivered to Marianne, which she eagerly caught from the servant, and, turning a death-like paleness, instantly ran out of the room. Eleanor, who saw as plainly by this as if she had seen the direction that it must come from Willoughby, felt immediately such a sickness at heart as made her hardly able to hold up her head, and sat in such a general tremor as made her fear it impossible to escape Mrs. Jennings' notice. That good lady, however, saw only that Marianne had received a letter from Willoughby, which appeared to her a very good joke, and which she treated accordingly by hoping with a laugh that she would find it to her liking. Of Eleanor's distress, she was too busily employed in measuring lengths of worsted for her rug to see anything at all, and calmly continuing her talk as soon as Marianne disappeared, she said, "Upon my word, I never saw such a young woman so desperately in love in my life. My girls were nothing to her, and yet they used to be foolish enough. But as for Miss Marianne, she is quite an altered creature. I hope from the bottom of my heart he doesn't keep her waiting much longer, for it is quite grievous to see her look so ill and forlorn. Pray, when are they getting married?" Eleanor, though never less disposed to speak than at that moment, obliged herself to answer such an attack as this, and therefore, trying to smile, replied, "And have you really, ma'am, talked yourself into a persuasion of my sister's being engaged to Mr. Willoughby? I thought it had been only a joke, but so serious a question seems to imply more. and I must beg, therefore, that you will not deceive yourself any longer. I do assure you that nothing would surprise me more than to hear of their being going to be married. For shame, Miss Dashwood. How can you talk so? Don't we all know that it must be a match, that they were over head and ears in love with each other from the first moment they met? Did not I see them together in Devonshire every day and all day long? And did I not know that your sister came to town with me on purpose to buy wedding clothes? Come, this won't do. Because you are so sly about yourself. You think nobody else has any senses, but it is no such thing. I can tell you, for it has been known all over this town ever so long. I tell everybody of it, and so does Charlotte. Indeed, ma'am, said Eleanor very seriously, you are mistaken. Indeed, you are doing a very unkind thing in spreading the report, and you will find that you have, that you will not believe me now. Mrs. Jennings laughed again, but Eleanor had not spirits to say more, and eager at all events to know what Willoughby had written, hurried away to their room, where on opening the door, she saw Marianne stretched on the bed, almost choked by grief, one letter in her hand, and 2 or 3 others laying by her. Eleanor drew near, but without saying a word, and seating herself on the bed, took her hand, kissed her affectionately several times, and then gave way to a burst of tears, which at first was scarcely less violent than Marianne's. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Virginia Woolf said of Jane Austen, of all great writers, she is the most difficult to catch in the act of greatness. But we are going to try and do exactly that. And let me introduce our wonderful panel. We are delighted to have Cliveden favourite Jonathan Bate back in the Great Hall. He's Foundation Professor of the Environmental Humanities at Arizona State University and a Senior Research Fellow in English Literature at Oxford. He was formerly Provost of Worcester. His 20 books include biographies of Wordsworth and Keats, and his most recent book is a memoir called Mad About Shakespeare. He is married to the real Jane Austen expert, Paula Byrne, which he will tell us about later. Then we have, we're thrilled that Marlon James returns to Cliveden, celebrated novelist, and academic books include the Booker-winning A Brief History of 7 Killings. He was the first Jamaican author to win literature's most prestigious prize. His most recent novel, Moonwitch Spider King, is the second novel in his Dark Star fantasy trilogy. Period drama addicts, hold on to your bonnets, but behold Andrew Davies, known for his many award-winning screenplays, which include House of Cards, Bleak House, War and Peace, Mr. Selfridge, but for our purposes, he is, of course, the screenwriter of BBC's 1995 Pride and Prejudice, the GOAT of TV adaptations, and Sense and Sensibility, in which the wonderful Lucy Boynton played that part. He is currently at work on a biographical series about Dickens and 3 new Jane Austen projects, The Watsons, Jane Fairfax, and a radical reworking of Mansfield Park. And we are also delighted to have Freya Johnston here, who is Professor of English at Oxford and Tutorial Fellow at St Anne's, and she's the author of Jane Austen, Early and Late, on Jane Austen's unpublished writing, and she co-edited Austen's teenage writings. Among her forthcoming books is Austen, A Life in 10 Letters. So I thought we would start by asking our panellists, and I'm going to start from that end with Jonathan, to pick a favourite and explain why, to sort of crystallise for us this wonderful writer for whom we have coined the term Austenmania and why it's endured for a quarter of a millennium.
Thank you very much for asking this. I do have imposter syndrome because it's my wife, Paula Byrne, who really ought to be here, but she's currently addressing 1,500 bonneted Jane Austen fanatics at the 250th anniversary conference of the Jane Austen Society of North America. But for me, I would say when I was young, it was Sense and Sensibility, because I was like Marianne, loving poetry and always falling in love and getting my heart broken. Now that I'm old, it's Persuasion, because there is a tenderness, a worldly maturity about that novel, an autumnal sadness, and yet at the same time a tremendous sense of hope and endurance. So, Persuasion.
Oh, wow. Mine is, I guess, a sort of a sentimental choice because it was the first one. I was doing my A-levels, and the teacher came in and go, you know, I envy you all. I envy you all. Because you're about to read for the first time something that I've read a million times, and I envy you. And I'm thinking, oh my God, D.H. Lawrence at last. I was a teenage boy. I spent my entire time in high school waiting for D.H. Lawrence. And he said, Pride and Prejudice. And first we were like, you've got to be kidding. But then we thought, but if he finds it so exciting and thrilling, there must be something to it. And it was. Partially because he was a fantastic teacher. But partially because the ways in which he broke it down, and we can talk about this later because I do have very strong opinions about Austen, that she really was the wisest. And I can explain that more later.
Amazing.
And that's why I still keep coming back to that book, even though there was a time I would have said Mansfield Park, because usually most people have read Pride and Prejudice and don't want to seem superior. So I'd say, well, you know, Mansfield Park. But I always go back to Pride and Prejudice.
Wonderful, thank you. Andrew?
Yeah, well, I could have picked any of them, I think. It's usually whichever one I'm reading at the time. But the one I've chosen is Emma, because it's an extremely interesting book. I think her basic plot is a Cinderella story. And if we think she started off with Pride and Prejudice and made it quite easy for herself by having an extremely charming and witty and clever and energetic, running everywhere heroine that we were obviously going to root for in a big way. And usually in these stories, there's a rich bitch in the way who's trying to thwart the heroine. But in Emma, she tried to make it hard, really hard for herself, I think, because the rich bitch in Emma is Emma. And she's snobbish, she's selfish, she treats other people as if they were toys. She's interested in manipulating other people, really. And I was in a session about 1925 over in a tent, and Sarah Churchill was talking about the Great Gatsby and careless people. And Jane Austen is a careless person. You know, she leaves hurt feelings wherever she goes. And yet, we come round to her. And I think that's a very interesting story. And also, I think Mr. Knightley's really great hero. Not much taste in women, but there you go. And I've heard it said that one of the reasons we didn't have a revolution in England was that there were enough people like Mr. Knightley about who actually cared for their tenants and their workers and so on. So, Emma is my choice.
Freya?
And I found it impossible to choose a favourite, so I've chosen a favourite scene instead from the Watsons, a work that Austen wrote but didn't finish in her late 20s, and which I've just discovered Andrew is busily adapting, so looking forward to that. It's a scene involving a child, and children are usually a source of annoyance in Austen, but this is a very rare moment. I think it's the greatest scene involving a child in her work, so I'll just read that out to you if that's okay. Emma, the heroine, Emma Watson rather than our other Emma, she's at a ball. And at the conclusion of the two dances, Emma found herself, she knew not how, seated amongst the Osborne set. And she was immediately struck with the fine countenance and animated gestures of the little boy as he was standing before his mother, wondering when they should begin. "You'll not be surprised at Charles's impatience," said Mrs. Blake. a lively, pleasant-looking little woman of 5 or 6 and 30, to a lady who was standing near her, when you know what a partner he is to have. Miss Osborne has been so very kind as to promise to dance the first 2 dances with him. Oh yes, we've been engaged this week, cried the boy, and we are to dance down every couple. On the other side of Emma, Miss Osborne, Miss Carr, and a party of young men were standing engaged in very lively consultation, and soon afterwards she saw the smartest officer of the set walking off to the orchestra to order the dance, while Miss Osborne, passing before her to her little expecting partner, hastily said, Charles, I beg your pardon for not keeping my engagement, but I'm going to dance these 2 dances with Colonel Beresford. I know you will excuse me, and I will certainly dance with you after tea. And without staying for an answer, she turned again to Miss Carr, and in another minute was led by Colonel Beresford to begin the set. If the poor little boy's face had in its happiness been interesting to Emma, it was infinitely more so under this sudden reverse. He stood the picture of disappointment, with crimson cheeks, quivering lips, and eyes bent on the floor. His mother, stifling her own mortification, tried to soothe his with the prospect of Miss Osborne's second promise, but though he contrived to utter with an effort of boyish bravery, "Oh, I do not mind it," it was very evident by the unceasing agitation of his features that he minded it as much as ever. Emma did not think or reflect. She felt and acted. "I shall be very happy to dance with you, sir, if you like it," said she, holding out her hand with the most unaffected good humour.
Freya, will you just explain a little bit about why you chose that marvellous
So, it's the energy of the scene, apart from anything else, but also the tenderness with which this poor little boy's sudden disappointment is treated. Charles was Jane Austen's only younger sibling, the youngest of the 8, which must have something to do with the way in which she envisages his feelings on being let down like that. And I think the way in which Emma is described as just instantly and impulsively responding with that act of kindness is so beautifully handled.
Yes, it's very sensitive, isn't it? I've got a sort of question for each of you, but everybody else sort of, because everybody on this wonderful panel comes at this from different angles. And Freya, can we start with you, actually? I just wondered if you could just tell us a little bit about how, the early years of Jane Austen, how she grew up, what her surroundings were, what she read and what her world view was, and her sort of first efforts, that kind of, those sort of early years.
Well, she grew up in a very, very, very quiet place, which is even quieter now than it was when she lived there. I think the population of Steventon has gone down from something like 300 to 250. So very quiet, but a very large family who made their own entertainment, and that's partly where her first writings come from. So she's 7th of 8 children, only 2 girls in that entire family, and the boyish element was even more pronounced in that her father took in boarders, male boarders, to teach in order to supplement his income. He was a vicar. So a huge household, mostly male, the younger of 2 girls, trying to get your voice heard in that kind of atmosphere, you can imagine might well encourage you to a performance element. And she wrote things from a very early age. The earliest surviving efforts are from when she was about 11, but she was probably writing things before that. She and her sister did go away to school for a little bit, not very long, but mostly the scene of their activities was the rectory at Steventon, where they lived until Jane Austen was in her mid-20s. And the early writings are short-spirited, extremely funny parodies, not just parody novels, but little plays, bits of verse. So generically quite wide-ranging, but kind of hysterical, short and extremely funny and very, very violent a lot of the time. They involve all the things that we're meant to understand conventionally are excluded from Austen, so suicide, murder, bigamy, most of the marriages in them are illegal. So really kind of, her family explained them later on by saying she was rehearsing by doing all the things that she wasn't going to do later on, but I think that's a bit of a convenient explanation. They didn't want them published, and they weren't published in their entirety, those works, until the 1950s, so they were held back for quite a while.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm interested, you mentioned plays and performance, because Jonathan, I know you feel that she was very influenced by the theatre and Shakespeare in particular, so there are real roots in sort of drama here, aren't there, domestic on the stage. Could you
absolutely right. And picking up on what Freya said, the family put on plays. And it's interesting, a lot of people thought, Jane Austen must have disapproved of the theatre because of all that business with Lovers' Vows in Mansfield Park. Although if you read it carefully, and you should always read Austen carefully, actually Sir Thomas says, well, we used to put on plays when you were children. The problem with Lovers' Vows is the choice of play, which was too risky, and the fact it took place while Sir Thomas was away. But yeah, Austen, so she participated in theatricals at home. She turned her favourite novel, Samuel Richardson's novel in letters to Charles Grandison, she turned it into a play. And then, although, as Freya says, she was brought up in this quiet vicarage, actually, in the course of her life, she spent a lot of time in London and in Bath. When her father retired, they moved to Bath. She wasn't happy about that initially, but while she was in Bath, where there was the Theatre Royal, it's still there today, she saw all the great actors, great comic actor called Elliston, for example, and there's a real sense in which she's taking the gifts of theatre and turning them into the novel. If you just think about the way that exits and entrances appear in the novels, quite often, a bit like in a farce, a character will come in, she thinks it's one person, the heroine thinks it's one person and it's another. And also, if you just think about her dialogue, the famous first chapter of Pride and Prejudice, apart from the opening sentence, which we all know, it's pretty well entirely in dialogue. And in a way, this is what made Andrew's adaptation, I wouldn't say so easy, but so successful, because it all comes out of the drama. Think about that couple, Elizabeth and Darcy, the couple who initially hate each other. This goes right back to Shakespeare, doesn't it? It's Beatrice and Benedict. And that, in turn, influenced a great swathe of Restoration and 18th century plays, comedies especially, often written by women, with the witty heroine. So, and it's interesting, too, to remember that when she was writing the novels, she tried them out by reading them aloud with the family, which is itself a form of theatre, of performance.
Thank you so much. Andrew, so apparently you had this very easy task. Do you think that's part of the reason why they make such... I mean, I read a statistic this morning. It said 6 complete novels, 80 adaptations, which has got to be a sort of record for somebody who only wrote, well, not only, but wrote 6 complete novels. What, for you, is the sort of appeal of Jane Austen? Is it that? Do you think it's her roots in drama, or is it...
No, so that is a great thing, and,
yes.
and she does make it easy for you because she does write great speakable dialogue that works as well now as it must have done then. It needs pruning quite a lot because her scenes are much longer than they need to be for TV. Yeah, I grew up really with TV where a minute is long enough for a scene. You can usually get it all said there. But yeah, one of the interesting things about Pride and Prejudice is it's easy for the first half, and then it gets hard. And I think it's because it started off as a novel in letters, is that right?
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe, which she converted. And I think if that's the case, she converted the first half of the book brilliantly because it's full of good scenes.
Right.
And it's pretty much confined to the same area. In the second half of the book, and this was brought home to me as a bit of a shock because I started off getting the first 3 episodes commissioned of 6, and I just wrote them really quick, and I knew exactly what I was doing, and it was great. And then there was a long wait before I got to go ahead to write the second half of the thing. But in the second half, everybody goes off all over the place and writes each other great long letters.
Oh, no.
And this is a problem. But as Robert McKee, the great screenwriting guru, says, every problem is an opportunity in disguise. And so it gave me the opportunity to write stuff like Darcy's long letter to Elizabeth after she's turned him down, in which he explains his kind of lonely and rather wounded childhood, where he had one friend who turned out to be a bit of a shit, really, and actually nearly seduced his school, Darcy's school, you know the story. But she was only 15, and Darcy rescues her. And I thought, well, we can dramatise all this. And part of my thing was I needed to show earlier on than the very end that Darcy had a tender heart in there somewhere. And you could show it with this, with the reconciliation with his sister. Does he tell her off? No. He just folds her in his arms, and she's very happy. She doesn't anticipate him being cross. She knows he loves her, and that's delightful. And we had a lovely Georgiana Darcy, and it just made a very nice moment. And then that moment pays off kind of later on, where in the music room, Elizabeth, who knows Georgiana's story but can't say it to anybody because it's private, she saves Georgiana from a moment of embarrassment. Poor old Miss Bingley putting her foot in it again. Darcy looks at her gratefully, and Elizabeth looks back at him, and there's that
Wonderful.
There's a great moment, really. I think on television you kind of use a lot of words, and then you get to a moment where you don't need any, and that's the best.
Wonderful. Marlon, two things. One is, two things from that. One is you reminded me about these sort of amazing characters, you know, large or small. They sort of have a whole identity. But you mentioned wisdom earlier. You mentioned her wisdom, and I just wanted you to say a little bit about, explain what you meant, what you were thinking of.
Well, just 1 second, I just wanted to gush over the Pride and Prejudice.
Come on, let's do it.
Because I saw a film version, and I was the guy screaming at the back, that's not Darcy, that's Heathcliff. The version, you know the version I'm talking about. So we get very protective of that sort of stuff. Because, you know, one of the things I like about, I know it's become just a Pride and Prejudice thing, because I think the characters appear in Emma and certainly Mansfield Park. She has a way of writing these unsavory characters who, I use a hip-hop term, they're the only people who know what time it is. So it's all what I love Mrs. Bennet. Give me her shrieking, give me everything. I love her. Because Mrs. Bennet is the only person who understands the consequences that's going on in this story. These girls need to get their asses married. And she's the only person who seems to realize the danger everybody is in.
She knows what time it is.
And I'm like, I was like, she's the only person who knows what time it is. Charlotte, to a sadder extent.
Yeah, Charlotte Lucas.
Yeah, to a sadder extent. You know, I remember when this great scene that everybody loves when, you know, Mr. Bennet said, you know, people would have loved you if you had accepted it in the something like accepted Khan's marriage proposal, and I'd have disliked you if you did. I'm like, dude, you're condemning her to penury. But the other thing about what I think I like about Austen, she does something that a Bronte would never do. You know, I like to have it out for the Brontes. Because in a novel like Mansfield Park, where Mrs. Norris she doesn't have to create a dramatic ending for Mrs. Norris. She just goes, Mrs. Norris spends her lifetime with Maria, and knowing their two personalities, we can say this is mutual punishment.
And that's it. Right?
They're eternal damnations. They have to live with each other forever. And she just leaves it alone. And I think it's very hard. It's certainly hard for me as a novice to leave stuff alone. And I think she has a huge trust in her reader. I think that, again, because she renders them with such wisdom that it's so natural. Like, I know she's kind of villain, but I really like Lucy and Emma. I listen to too many rap records. So I'm listening to Lucy and I go, damn, she's gangster. You know? she wrecks a relationship, only to realize that guy ain't much. So she goes for the richer one.
Yeah.
And you know, and Austen again is sort of like, but this is the way it happens if you go through life with no this and no conscience. I'm like, yeah, but.
Yeah.
So I think there is a wiseness, as I say, about the human condition, and I think if you want to find somebody as wise, you have to go to Shakespeare.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, and you've done a very wonderful portrait of the strengths of her villains and her characters. Freya, can you tell us a little bit more about that? Was that something? I mean, it sounds like from what you were saying that started off quite early, that she could do, she could do the bad as well as the good, but she could do it so succinctly and efficiently.
Well, the early ones are extremely efficient in that they give absolutely no explanation of their motives whatsoever. They just say things like, I've murdered my mother and now I'm going to murder my sister at the end. I mean, that's the very early version. But I think of the ones that you mentioned, Mrs. Norris is absolutely the worst in terms of, I mean, clearly there are terrible consequences to the attempted seductions and indeed successful seductions of some of the male characters, but as a portrait of exploitation, Mrs. Norris is an absolute masterpiece, and I know readers at the time said so as well, really enjoyed the ways in which Mrs. Norris exercises her own, it's kind of revenge for her own dependence, isn't it? That she is in a position of relying on the Bertrams herself, and so the only person other than the servants that she can really have a go at is Fanny Price, and she exploits that to the maximum. So yeah, I think Mrs. Norris probably takes the biscuit in terms of a fully developed portrait of somebody who is actually evil in terms of what she tries to do. Go on.
Coming on that, we haven't yet mentioned Northanger Abbey, and that's really interesting because it's conventionally read as a parody of the Gothic novel. The Gothic novel, the heroine is submitted to some terrible fate at the hands. I mean, like Lewis's novel, The Monk, the villain ends up raping an entire nunnery. So this was much mocked. You think, well, this is a very different novel, but actually what happens in Northanger Abbey is when General Tilney discovers that Catherine hasn't got any money, he throws her out in the middle of the night, which is just what a Gothic villain does. And so what Austen is saying is you don't have to go to mad monks and Machiavellian Italians in the Alps in order to get true inhumanity. It's right here. Cruelty can be domestic.
Jonathan, is she a moralist then in that sense, other than playing on the Gothic novel? Is there a moral lesson she's trying to convey? I mean, I know we always see these as courtship novels, but as you illustrate, there's a lot more going on than...
She's deeply moral without being moralistic, I'd say.
Okay.
Another of her favourite writers was Dr. Johnson, the greatest sort of moral thinker of the 18th century, and she takes Johnson's wisdom, but she doesn't take any kind of didactic strain. I mean, what Johnson said of Shakespeare is that Shakespeare shows us human beings as they really are, both the good and the bad of life, the mingled yarn of humanity. And that's what she does as well, which is why I agree with Marlon that she's only comparable with Shakespeare. And indeed, an early reviewer did say, it described her as the Shakespeare prose writer of our country.
Andrew, do you see that? Do you see Shakespeare in there? Or,
I certainly do see her as a moralist, but it's interesting that I'm sorry, I've got two thoughts competing in my head. I'll do them one at a time. One at a time. I was going to say she's got a terrible weakness for bad boys, because Willoughby is a truly dreadful man in Sense and Sensibility. Before the action of the novel, he has taken a schoolgirl out of school, made love to her for a while in a country cottage, got her pregnant. He doesn't know about that yet. And ridden off into the distance and forgotten completely all about her. And this kind of comes back to haunt him because she turns out to be Colonel what's-his-name's ward. And he's then, yeah, he's also, has he fallen in love with, who is she? The younger sister of the two. Marianne, of course. I think maybe he has. But I mean, basically, he just goes around with his kit of poetry. Poems good for seducing girls with, and reads them out and succeeds, and then realizes he can't afford to marry her, so he goes after this rich woman. And I think there's a good bit. One of the other things I was saying is that these darkest bits are often disguised in Jane Austen because she doesn't turn them into actual scenes, and nobody seemed to realise there was a duel in Sense and Sensibility. She just doesn't put it on stage. Colonel Brandon says one meeting there had to be, he to attempt to defend his conduct, I to punish it. And I thought, when I read this, I thought, wow, yes, a duel, a duel. Let's put it on the screen, and let's have Colonel Brandon give Willoughby a good old beating up. And he's like quivering on the floor, begging for mercy, like the coward that he is. And then later on in the story, he turns up at the house at the time when Marianne is very ill and maybe by that time recovering, and he meets Eleanor. And in Emma Thompson's version and in the book, Eleanor is surprisingly lenient with Willoughby. I thought, no, I'd have beaten him out of the house. In my version, which you can see on ITV, are hopeless about, they don't have a thing about keeping their archive, but you can watch it on YouTube, the whole thing.
Okay.
And so she gives him a tremendous telling off, which anybody who agrees with me about Willoughby would be very pleased to see. One of the other things for seeing, I'll stop in a minute.
Please don't.
For watching that on YouTube is that I wrote a. No, I'm talking about something else now. I'll stop.
No, please don't. But you gave us a brilliant description there of Willoughby. This is for anybody, really, who feels like it's sort of somehow these very memorable villains, but they're much more than caricatures, aren't they? She doesn't fall into that trap. They are, even in a few words, you've met them, you might meet them, they kind of live with you, they could walk into the room.
Because she grounds them within human possibility.
Okay.
And I like my Gothic villains, and I like my creatures of pure evil like Bill Sikes, and so on. But there, some of the things these characters do, I can see. I was gonna say I can see myself doing them. Not that I will do that, but I can understand.
Right.
If I am Lucy and I realize I'm the smartest person in the room, I'm probably going to treat you badly, or it's and as we pointed out, Mrs. Norris comes from a situation of where bitterness is already a part of it.
Yeah.
And I think it's I mean, then you have like a total sociopath like Wickham.
Yeah.
But I think there is a sense, and I think the best villains, they feel within the realm of human possibility. Okay. And they're the same people who could look at you and go, you say what you want, had this happened to you, you might have done the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Freya,
But
do you want
just,
to
to,
add to
well,
that?
just
Yeah,
to come back to that point about the duel and how you felt you wanted to make that something that happened in the televised version of Sense and Sensibility, because Austen does have all of these terrible things happen, you know, but they might just be mentioned or glanced at in passing. The editors of Emma say it's very peculiar that you have the story of Jane Fairfax and Frank Churchill as the peripheral story, because their story is actually far more dramatic and mysterious. It's like theirs is the real lurid novel, and around it you have Emma and Knightley, who Emma never goes anywhere, she never leaves the village. In a sense, their match is highly predictable, but that's the plot that Austen focuses on and fills with interest. So I think that's one of the, if we're trying to think about catching her in the act of greatness, why is it that she, as it were, de-emphasizes the thing that looks lurid and actually stresses and foregrounds the thing that looks, how does she give interest to that kind of everyday plot?
And presumably the answer, I don't want to answer the question, I want to ask it, is through the writing style. I want to talk a little bit about the language, the humour, the irony, and
there's something to be said about that luridness being a part of the atmosphere. It's one of the reasons why, in some ways, there can be more gut truths in an Austen novel than in a Victorian novel. In that she may not talk about the unseemly things on stage, but she's not kidding herself, and she's not kidding you either. That this world exists, this world helps shape the scene that we're in, even if we're not hovering there.
But she's also very good, isn't she, at leaving the key thing unsaid. I mean, you know, Emma's famous reply to Knightley, you know, she said what a lady always does. We don't actually hear what she says. And similarly, of course, Persuasion, she rewrites the ending and rewrites it in the form of a letter, in a way returning to her origins. In many ways, her novels grow out of the 18th century tradition of the novel in letters. Sense and Sensibility, originally Eleanor and Marianne, was almost certainly, in its first draft, a novel in letters, as you said, for P&P Mervyn. It's so interesting at the very end in Persuasion, she goes back to the letter, because in the letter, as opposed to the dialogue, there's a sense that you're kind of fully in control of what you say. And I do think that Wentworth's letter is just one of the most astonishing pieces of writing.
On the writing, can we just talk a little bit before we open the floor to questions about humour and free and direct style? She's often credited as bringing it into the canon. Freya, will you explain a little bit about what it is?
So, I mean, essentially, free and direct style is a form of writing where the character's perspective is mixed up with the perspective of the narrator. So a sentence like, Emma must invite Harriet to dinner, which looks like it might be a bold statement of fact, actually could, if you read it from emanating from within Emma's head, is actually not a fact at all. It's just Emma thinking, oh, I've got to do that. And it's not really an imperative. So it's the mixing up of what looks like objective fact with a perspective that in Emma's case certainly is full of self-interest and misapprehension and actually pretty disastrous intentions lots of the time. So, I mean, Austen didn't invent that style, but she brought it to a pitch of near perfection that lots of people have tried to match since then.
It allows you to be inside and outside the character at the same time.
Yeah.
So a first-person novel, you're always inside the protagonist's head. Third person, the author is sort of standing outside. With this style, you're in and out at once.
Yeah. Americans call it close third.
Close third,
Was Austen an influence on you in that way?
Oh, absolutely. In the sense of, being outside and inside at the same time. And sometimes when there are passages where you realize that's not Austen, that's Emma. That's not Austen, that's Elizabeth. That's not Austen, that's so on. And it's something that, I think it's certainly one of her most, and as I say, I don't think she invented it, but she certainly pointed a way for us to use it. And it's a way you manage to be sort of worldly and sort of a worldview, but at the same time very closely connected to human nature. So I think Close Third really helped her, in that regard. And it helps any author in that regard. So you can stay in and out at the same time, where it becomes for her certainly seamless.
Andrew, does this inform adaptation, this sort of very kind of, this mixed style between, you know, the narration and internal characters' own sort of monologue?
No.
That's the problem.
Just got
That's
what
the problem
people
with the
say
can't do it.
and how they look and how they move and the music and that's it.
I feel like we've barely scratched the surface. Just because I know you're working on a lot of it, will you just tell us what your future Austen projects, just in case it doesn't come up in the questions, because I know people would love to know.
Very briefly,
Yeah, sure.
I'm working on an adaptation of the Watsons, which is a fragment, like Sanditon, and she only gives you enough story for the first episode, if that. But she sets up a lot of good characters, and I'm writing that with a younger colleague called Stella Mertz, and we finished the first episode, and we're hoping that's going to go ahead. But it's a bit worrying because people tell me that WGBH Boston, which is public television in the States, who are funding the script, Trump doesn't like them, and he might be trying to close them down. But anyway, that's the Watsons.
Yes.
Coming on this Jane Fairfax, I just fell for that, and I went for the lurid thing, and I'm just total sympathizer with Jane myself. She is the true heroine of the novel, of course. And I started in Weymouth, where she does have sex with Frank Churchill, who is... and that's the reason. She's a young woman of very passionate sensibility. She falls for him. He's very plausible. He's very charming. His charm comes from something very dangerous, which is like the charm of some film stars who appeal to the audience, saying, I had a fucking terrible childhood. You did too. You could save me, or we could save each other. He's like this. I think he's bitterly resentful of his father giving him away in the first place. He spent 20-odd years trying to please a very difficult woman who's probably been in love with him since he was pubertal. And he's determined that no woman is ever going to have power over him again. And he doesn't care how much that hurts, because he's hurting. He's been hurting all his life. And so, and poor Jane is trapped. I mean, if it was a modern story, she'd be able to give him up and have an abortion or whatever. But in this story, she's in thrall to a psychopath, basically.
Okay.
That's the story. But I've got an ending. They do get married, and Emma does get married to Knightley. But sadly, Emma dies in childbirth a year after the wedding. And
you can't do that.
And Frank, you know, doesn't take to marriage very well, and is unfaithful, makes Jane very unhappy, runs away to the East Indies, dies a dissolute wreck.
Oh my God, what is going on here?
This takes about 4 years, but it's all in a thing on the screen or a voiceover, and after a decent interval of time, Mr. Knightley journeys up to Yorkshire and brings back Jane as his second wife. and they live happily ever
Oh my
after.
God. Okay, I think I'm going to have to go down and lie down after
That's
that.
Jane. Mansfield Park.
Okay. Just in a sentence, because I've got to do the questions now.
Exactly.
So, go on.
We go to Antigua, where
Okay.
Sir Thomas has a second family.
I actually believe that.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I
Okay.
don't know why no one's done it before.
I believe that part.
Well,
yeah.
I speak for the audience when I say we can't wait. But and now we're going to have some questions. We've got 2 roving mics. Does anyone want to ask any of our wonderful panel? Over here, please.
Hi, thank you so much. I had a question about adaptations, actually, and radical reworkings, and what do you think makes a great adaptation, not just Austen, but a great literary classic?
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't hear
It
that.
was
What makes a great
not just
adaptation?
Austen. What makes a great adaptation?
Get
What
the
is
right writer.
the right writer? Okay. Yeah. Anyone want to add anything?
Well, I would say the greatest film adaptation of Austen is Clueless.
Yeah.
Because,
I agree.
Popular with the front
because
row,
it
right?
absolutely catches the spirit without being bothered with the letter.
Okay.
Yeah,
Marvelous.
whereas I was saying that a film adaptation with Pride and Prejudice, Keira Knightley's adaptation, I think doesn't work. Largely because they really, as I said, they really want to turn Darcy into Heathcliff. Like that's a different novel, and that's a different sensibility. Why is Darcy coming over the moors? I was the one nerd in the audience going, "That's Heathcliff." Well, certainly with and none of us are saying that Austen is easy to adapt. I mean, but at the same time, I think Austen doesn't need as much fixing as American producers like to think.
Okay.
Yeah, the houses are always too big, aren't they?
I just wanted to
Yeah.
ask about, has anyone got any other question? Or we could talk about the settings, actually. I was going to say, I'm interested you say about the
yeah,
houses too big, because...
Question?
Oh, go on. Sorry,
Yeah.
go on.
Oh, sorry.
Mike.
Thank you. I've just got a broad question for anyone about what you think Austen's political positioning was, because you mentioned Antigua briefly, and obviously there's been a long critical tradition of trying to work out what it was that she was doing with that, but also with the big houses and what she was trying to say about Britain's economic structures. I just wondered if anyone had any thoughts on where you think she's trying to land on that and what we can take from it.
Who wants to
Freya's
start?
probably
Freya? Yes,
the expert
Freya.
on this.
I think she's a novelist, not a politician. So I mean, her position, as I understand it, to the extent that she has a political position, she is against exploitation of any kind, because you see that played out within the plots of many of these novels. So I don't think she's advancing a particular radical or conservative position, although the case has been made equally vehemently for both those sides. I don't see that as being what she's trying to do, because she is so overtly and passionately committed to the novel as a form, and that doesn't mean writing secretly attract advancing in any particular political cause. So I think she is keenly against the Mrs. Norris kind of character at its most extreme, but you see that also in the way in which Anne Elliot is treated in Persuasion, the kind of ignoring and sidelining and castigating of people who have no power to speak for themselves. So to the extent that that's a political position, that's how I would describe it.
I mean, picking up my point about the houses, that the movies often use aristocratic houses.
Yeah.
She hates aristocrats, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, you know, and even a baroness, the ghastly Sir Walter Elliot, you know. She likes the gentry, and the things she most likes are the rising naval class. I mean, that's obviously because of her brothers, who have these amazing careers and end up as admirals. But, you know, and that's a really interesting development in her work. If you think about it, like in Mansfield Park, Admiral Crawford is a hideous character off stage. But then you get to Persuasion, and Admiral Croft has the best marriage in Austen, but Sir Walter really looks down on him.
Yes.
I think I see her as a conservative politically, really. But she's a bit despairing when you get people in charge like Sir Walter. I think she sees Sir Thomas quite positively in Mansfield Park, and that's a bit of a problem. What she's absolutely clear about is Mr. Knightley in Emma, who is an example of a very good way to be a gentleman farmer. And he has as much respect for his workmen and his tenant farmers as he does for his posh neighbours. And Emma, the novel has, there's a bit of terror in it with these gypsies who can, a gang of gypsies, children, can overpower a young woman and take her money. And I think Jane Austen's a bit anxious about the revolution possibly occurring here because she had a cousin or an aunt or something, didn't she, who escaped?
Yes, her husband,
His husband
was guillotined, yeah.
Marlon, do you see any politics in Jane Austen?
I guess the politics of class.
Right.
And the ways in which, I guess, what we may consider domestic has very big, wider dimensions than we might think. You grew up in. I grew up in Jamaica. We still struggle over class. Ultimately, that's still the tension. Class or race, sometimes they're pretty much interchangeable. But it's sort of, after all these years, 250 years, those things still matter. It's amazing in 2025 that where you were born and how you were born still matters.
Maybe that's one of the reasons for Austenmania. I read something that said you could go anywhere in the world. You could go to, you could go to India, you could go to Africa, and somebody would say, I know characters just like this, from Jane Austen to 200 years on. So you can. Andrew, one more thing. I think you've already touched on this by what you're working on, but you have been accused of sexing up Austen a lot. Would you like to,
once again,
defend yourself?
Defend yourself.
Would anyone else like to weigh in for or against? What do you? Where are we on?
The novels are about sex and money, mainly, I think, and class, and kindness, etc., etc. But in Pride and Prejudice, the engine of the plot is Darcy's desire for Elizabeth. He fancies her long before he likes her. He doesn't know why. Something makes him follow around like a dog, and it's the selfish gene. It's a Darwinian novel, really, because I only realised that long after I'd adapted it. But what he's supposed to do is marry this inbred lady, what's her name, Anne de Bourgh, who can scarcely get a word out and is sickly and so on, and that will unite the dynasties and what have you, and something in his genes tells him, no, I want this lively, cheeky girl who stands up to me and confuses me and all that.
In defence of Andrew, the novels are incredibly sexy. I mean, when Henry Crawford and Maria go across the ha-ha and she rips her dress, I mean, it's like hot stuff.
Freya, do you see that?
Yes, absolutely. They are sexually supercharged pieces of writing. I mean, thinking about your imagined development of Emma, I mean, Austen herself had a sense of what happened after the end of these books. Although we don't hear a great deal about it, we know that in the case of a couple of novels, once they've been published, she talked to her family about what was going to happen next. And she said about Emma that it would be 2 years before Emma and Mr. Knightley could move out of Emma's home, presumably because then Mr. Woodhouse died. But the other thing she said was that Jane Fairfax died young. So that kind of, so she did have a sense of there being it's not just the end in the wedding or the marriage. Actually, we only see the wedding in Emma, don't we? It's not just a finish there. She does have a sense of what happens next.
So she ended on the wedding to maintain the comic plot, perhaps, but we don't, I'm afraid we've run out of time, so we can't get into that, but we could go on for hours. Thank you so much, panel.